Most people don't click on videos like this because they're curious. They click because something already hurts. Maybe you loved an Aquarius, and no matter how deeply you cared, you always felt slightly unnecessary. They didn't cling. They didn't panic. They didn't fall apart at the thought of losing you. And somehow, that hurt more than rejection. Here's the truth people don't like hearing. Most humans need to be loved in order to survive. Aquarius doesn't. And before you get angry, defensive, or ready to disagree, let me be clear. This isn't about Aquarius being better. It's not about them being colder. And it's definitely not about them being incapable of love. It's about something much more uncomfortable. Aquarius doesn't organize their life around emotional dependence. And if you've never experienced that up close, you won't understand how destabilizing it can feel. From childhood, we're taught the same emotional rule. Love is oxygen. Connection is safety. Being chosen means you matter. Without love, people fall apart. And for most people, that's absolutely true. Love gives identity. Love gives belonging. Love gives meaning. But Aquarius never learned to breathe that way. They learned early that being loved is beautiful. But being free is essential. That's where the difference begins. Aquarius doesn't wake up asking, "Who needs me?" or "Who chooses me?" They wake up asking, "Am I living truthfully? Am I expanding? Am I thinking clearly?" And because of that, love never became their emotional life support. To people who live through attachment, that sounds wrong, even threatening. Because if love isn't necessary, then what keeps someone loyal? What keeps them staying? What keeps them from leaving when things get hard? That question sits at the center of every relationship with Aquarius, and it rarely gets answered in a way that feels comforting. Here's something that needs to be said plainly. Aquarius can be alone and be completely fine, not numbing themselves, not dissociating, not pretending, actually fine. They can go weeks, months, even years without romantic attachment, and still feel mentally alive. They build, they imagine, they question, they evolve. They don't wither from lack of affection. And to people who rely on emotional closeness for stability, that fact feels almost insulting. Because if love is a basic human need, how is Aquarius surviving without it? The answer is simple and disturbing. Aquarius doesn't feed on love. They feed on meaning. Ideas stimulate them more than affection. Truth excites them more than reassurance. Freedom energizes them more than intimacy. Love is welcome, but it's not required. And that distinction changes how they move through relationships. Most people love to fill something. Loneliness, insecurity, fear of being unchosen, fear of disappearing. Aquarius doesn't love to fill a void. They love when it doesn't cost them themselves, which is why they don't chase. They don't beg. They don't panic when someone pulls away. And that calmness is often what breaks the other person. Because when you love harder, and they don't grip tighter, it feels like imbalance. You start asking questions you never wanted to ask. Do they really care? Why don't they need me more? Why am I more afraid of losing them than they are of losing me? That fear grows quietly, because we're taught that love should look like attachment, like urgency, like dependence, like emotional fusion. But Aquarius doesn't fuse. They coexist. And coexistence feels cold to someone craving reassurance. Here's where people misjudge Aquarius the most. They assume that because Aquarius doesn't need love, they must not value it. That's wrong. Aquarius values love deeply. They just refuse to make it a survival mechanism. They don't want to need you to function. They want to choose you without fear. And that kind of love doesn't perform desperation. It doesn't collapse when threatened. It doesn't plead to be kept. It simply exists. Or it leaves. That's the part that hurts. Because when Aquarius leaves, they don't fall apart loudly. They don't spiral publicly. They don't chase closure. They walk away intact. And for the person left behind, that feels like proof they were never important. But that conclusion isn't always true. Aquarius doesn't measure love by pain. They don't believe suffering equals depth. They don't equate devastation with meaning. They can grieve quietly and still move forward, which looks heartless if you're still bleeding. Here's a hard sentence to hear. Loving an Aquarius can make you feel replaceable, even when you're not, because they don't collapse when you're gone. They don't lose themselves in longing. They don't need you to survive. And if your self-worth is tied to being needed, that dynamic will destroy you. Not because Aquarius is cruel, but because they won't perform emotional dependency to soothe your insecurity. They won't pretend to be weaker than they are. They won't act afraid just to make you feel powerful. That refusal feels like rejection. Here comes the first real confrontation. Many people don't actually want love. They want to be needed. They want proof that without them, the other person would fall apart. That desire is rarely admitted, but it's common, and Aquarius can't fulfill it because they don't equate love with reliance. They equate love with respect, and respect means not asking someone to abandon themselves to keep you. So when someone says, "I need you," Aquarius hears pressure. When someone says, "I can't live without you," Aquarius hears responsibility they didn't ask for. That doesn't mean they don't care. It means they won't carry another person's emotional survival on their back. That's where relationships with Aquarius either evolve or explode. Because if you need constant reassurance, Aquarius will feel trapped. If you equate closeness with control, Aquarius will withdraw. If you believe love means sacrifice of self, Aquarius will eventually walk away. Not in anger, in clarity. This is the part most people don't want to accept. Aquarius doesn't fear losing love. They fear losing autonomy. They fear shrinking to fit expectations. They fear being emotionally obligated into a version of themselves that isn't real. So they choose solitude over suffocation, again and again. And solitude doesn't scare them. It energizes them. Because alone, they don't have to perform. They don't have to reassure. They don't have to negotiate their identity. They can think. They can breathe. They can exist without explanation. That's why Aquarius often seems distant even when they're present. They don't merge. They observe. They don't cling. They stay until staying costs too much. Here's the paradox. Aquarius doesn't need love to live. But when they love cleanly. They don't play games. They don't manipulate with affection. They don't threaten abandonment. They don't love out of fear. They love because the connection allows both people to remain whole, which is rare. That's why Aquarius doesn't fall often. They don't rush intimacy. They don't romanticize attachment. They don't confuse chemistry with compatibility. They watch. They test. They wait. And because of that, when they finally choose someone, it's deliberate, not impulsive, not desperate. But here's the painful part for the other person. Aquarius doesn't show love the way most people expect. They don't drown you in reassurance. They don't constantly affirm your importance. They assume autonomy equals respect. So they give space. When you wanted closeness, they stay calm. When you wanted intensity, they remain steady. When you wanted proof. And that mismatch creates doubt. You start wondering if you matter. You start questioning your value. Not because Aquarius devalues you, but because they don't anchor their identity to you. That's a brutal realization, because it forces you to confront something uncomfortable. Do you want to be loved, or do you want to be needed? Aquarius offers the first. Most people secretly crave the second. That's why loving Aquarius is not for everyone. They won't collapse for you. They won't lose themselves for you. They won't stay if staying requires betrayal of self. And that boundary feels like abandonment. To someone who equates love with sacrifice, here's the second rise. Aquarius doesn't survive on love. They survive on truth. And truth doesn't always feel warm. It doesn't always feel safe. But it's honest. And honesty, to Aquarius, matters more than comfort. They would rather be alone and authentic than loved and diminished. That's not romantic, but it's real. And reality doesn't guarantee security. It guarantees clarity. This is why Aquarius often attracts intense lovers. People who feel deeply. People who attach strongly. People who want fusion. At first, it feels electric. Aquarius brings freedom. The other brings passion. But eventually, the imbalance shows. One wants reassurance. The other wants space. One fears loss. The other trusts survival. And no amount of love fixes that difference. Because it's not about affection. It's about emotional architecture. Some people are built to need love as oxygen. Aquarius is built to need freedom as air. Neither is wrong. But pretending they're the same causes pain. Here's the final truth. Aquarius can live well without being loved. But that doesn't mean they don't value love. It means when they love, they do it without fear, without dependency, without illusion. And that kind of love is rare. Because it doesn't trap. It doesn't bind. It doesn't promise forever out of desperation. It chooses, every day, without panic. So if you've ever loved an Aquarius and felt strangely unnecessary, you weren't invisible. You were just loving someone who doesn't need love to survive. And that difference changes everything. If this made you uncomfortable, say why. If you disagree, argue in the comments. If you've lived this, you already know how real it is. Like the video if it made you think. Share it if it made you feel something. Subscribe if you want more conversations most people avoid. And if you're an Aquarius listening, you were never broken. You were never cold. You were simply never built to live on love alone.